Welcome to Washington in Focus. I'm Washington State Government reporter Carlene Johnson, and joining me today is our investigative reporter with the Center Square, TJ Martinell, who wrote an article, very interesting article, about an employee with the city of Everett who was trying to get out of the union and get out of paying union dues, but it's not as easy as you would think, maybe, to opt out. TJ, set the stage for me on what happened with this employee.
Yeah, so in 2018, the United States Supreme Court ruled in its Janus decision that public employees cannot be compelled to pay union dues or be members of the union. That constituted a violation of their First Amendment right as far as political speech and expression. So Washington State, like many other states, in response passed laws that restrict the way in which you can opt out. So you can't just opt out whenever you want. There's a very specific 15-day waiting period. I believe it's on an annual basis. And so you have to do all this written stuff. And that's what this employee with the city of Everett tried to get out of the union. And what they're claiming is that the city continued to deduct money from their paycheck and give it to the union, despite the fact that she had notified them that she no longer wished to do so. So,
how much money are we talking about here? Because monthly dues, I know, for whether it's Washington Education Association or WFSE, some of these are big chunks out of the paycheck to support the union.
Yeah, I mean, it probably depends on seniority, how much they're getting paid. I was a member of a union when I worked for QFC as a kid, as a grocery clerk. So I had to pay union dues, but it was a lot of it was based around that. But that was the private sector. This is the public sector, even though I did have to join the union in order to have my job at QFC. This is kind of what the complaint's about. But what I think what's more interesting as far as this story has to do with the fact that there's this presumption that when you get a job with a public employer, you are automatically a member of the union and you are automatically having dues deducted from your paycheck, and you have to go out of your way in order to get out. And I think that that's really interesting, because in what other context would we consider that to be appropriate, where there's this presumptive, you're going to... It's like if you went to work for an employer and they automatically enrolled you in some political group, because the unions I understand that they represent the workers and they do negotiations over contracts and bargaining agreements, but they also get involved in, politically. They have, political stances. They have, they support certain issues. They oppose certain issues. They support political candidates and they oppose other types of political candidates. So they are a politically active body that you're forced to give money to. And you, as a member of the union, you may not approve of what they're doing, and you don't have the same kind of recourse because you can't withdraw consent whenever you want. And you also don't, your explicit consent is not required. And so again, are there other areas of life where we think that this is how it should be?
Yeah, and then I know you spoke to folks with the National Right to Work Foundation about the whole opt-out process, because I guess in this story you wrote about, TJ, the union said, it was all kind of a misunderstanding or whatever, and the employee got paid back for their union dues, but it seems like everybody's kind of trying to maybe pass the buck. This wasn't our job to do this. This was their. And
I think
blocking and hovering.
I think that's on. That's part of what I would say many people would argue is the issue with having this presumptive membership with the union. Is the union they're acting as a middleman between the employer and the employee without the consent of the employee.
Right.
And they're the one getting the money. And so, the employee goes to the employer and says, I don't want you giving them money anymore from my paycheck. And they say, well, then you're going to have to go talk to them. And then you go talk to the union. And they say, well, you need to go talk to the employer. And this is the thing, you have to give written notice to both of them, as opposed to just saying, hey, I don't have to inform the union that I'm not paying dues anymore. It's like it's like a gym membership where you just stop paying your monthly due and then they revoke your membership, right? But you don't,
right?
you don't have to tell them. You can say, and now if you're doing like a credit card, monthly payment.
No, deduct. Yeah.
Yeah, you do auto deduct. Yeah, you can reach out to them, but it's like with any kind of membership where you really don't need their permission to no longer be a member. It's like being a member of a yacht club, right? You don't have to explain to them that you don't want to be a member of the yacht club and go through a process. You can just say, hey, I'm just not interested in being a member of the club or something like that. And I shouldn't have to be a member of the yacht club in order to sail a boat, right? I guess it's probably the analogy. So that's what's kind of going on, is you have this weird relationship with the union where they are by default representing an employee and the employee has no say over that. And it's also a monopoly. There's no other union that's representing these employees, and they don't have a choice to say, you know what, this union is not representing me the way that I would like it to be. I would like to be represented. I would like to be a member of another union that can set up its own bargaining agreements that apply only for its members. See, that would seem like it would be more where there'd be incentives for the union to say, you know what, we're going to negotiate a better contract for our union members than those union members who work for the same employee. And that's going to incentivize people to want to be members of our union, as opposed to this sort of this like we're the only game in town. We're the only restaurant in town. So the food quality that might not have to be the greatest on the planet, or like the only gas station in town, and it's 100 miles to the nearest gas station. You don't have to really worry about competition.
Well, and you've got so many folks opting out, even if there are restrictions for that opt-out window. You said like 15 days a year, a little 15-day window in a year. And, you maybe were on vacation during that time or whatever, missed the emails reminding you that, okay, this is it, your one and only time to opt out. But I mean, I know you've spoken before to the Freedom Foundation, as I have on several occasions, and they've, since that Janus decision in 2018, they've helped, tens of thousands of people in various unions across the country get out. I covered a similar story with an employee who filed a grievance for missing the opt-out window last year, and they were told that they had to wait a year and a half, because I think there was 2 opt-out periods, that they had to wait a year and a half because, like you said, you have to have that written notice in. I mean, they make it so complicated, and that's because they're losing a lot of money. I mean, a ton of money.
I think what I find interesting is that and this is an aside from this the story, but it's related, is that it goes back to what I was saying about how public sector unions are able to get involved in politics when rather than act as a representative of the employees in contract negotiations and ensure that their rights are being protected and their rights aren't being violated by the employer, but they're also getting involved in politics. And so it really raises a question of, should they be allowed to do so? And also on top of that, this is not the private sector. This is the public sector. So this is a private entity receiving taxpayer dollars that they are then able to then use for political purposes. But also, when a public sector union sits down with a public employer to negotiate, it's one group of it's them negotiating over taxpayer dollars. So nobody there is discussing their money. The same way you would see with like a private sector business employer, where they're saying, hey, we want to do a pay raise for the workers. Then that's what the union's advocating. And the employer gets to say, well, since it's our money, we have an incentive to ensure that the company's making a profit, and we have to live within our means, or we don't have the money for it. Whereas a public employee can say, yeah, we'll do this raise, and then go to taxpayers and say, we got to raise taxes because we don't have enough money or something like that.
No, No, well, look at even the Washington Education Association, right? The teachers representing teachers across the state pay a large amount in dues, probably the most politically active. Well, maybe Washington Federation of State Employees is, but, seeing them down in Olympia through the entire legislative session, they, and as you say, very one-sided in their politics. And for those that might object to that, I can see where people wouldn't want to, I don't want my money. And we're talking, I think WFSE rates for the story I covered last year it's nearly $1,300 a year for one employee's dues. So we're talking a big chunk of change that folks.
Yeah. I don't know how many people know this, but the other issue is this what I would argue could be a conflict of interest to have an entity that can politically support the elected officials that they're negotiating with over these contracts. And an example of that is when the governor during an election year sits down to do contract negotiations with the public sector unions. There's many cases where they are negotiating with people who have donated to their campaigns.
100%.
So
yes, a little bit of a conflict there.
It's a conflict of interest. And also the bargaining agreements are done behind closed doors. So they are not subject to the Open Meetings Act. The public and the press are not allowed to see them, and you don't get access to any of the records until after the negotiations have gone on. So there's a lack of transparency and also what people could argue is a conflict of interest with this stuff. So this is the reason why these issues I think are being highlighted is because, this specific case could have been an administrative error or misunderstanding or miscommunication, and it's gotten resolved. But if there was more of a transparent process, or if a lot of these issues could be resolved if employees had to actively enroll themselves in the union.
Right.
It's because we have this automatic enrollment and automatic deduction from their paycheck without their consent. And someone can argue, well, by taking the job, they consented. Well, that's because the state law requires that. And so the question is, why should it be required for them to join the union automatically rather than it be through explicit consent?
Yeah, it's a huge important issue, and I'm glad you brought up as we wrap up here. I'm glad you brought up the bargaining behind for state workers behind closed doors, because as you well know, during this legislative session, that became a huge issue because former Governor Inslee, gave state employees big, giant, fat raises. And, we ended up with whatever the actual budget shortfall was or is, that was brought up many times those raises shouldn't have been, given to state workers with the rest of taxpayers in out of luck, so to speak. But, well, I appreciate the conversation. Really interesting. If you want to read more about this article and others, thecentersquare.com. And for now, along with TJ Martinell, I'm Carlene Johnson with Washington in Focus.